Welcome to another video of the Azure Migrate series. In this episode, we'll cover how you can use Azure Migrate Wave Planning capability to create a high-fidelity plan to migrate your large-scale infrastructure to Azure. If you have watched the previous videos in the series, you must already be aware of how a typical migration journey is divided into stages of decide, plan, and execute. Once you have created a decision to migrate to Azure, you can use Azure Migrate Assessment to identify the target Azure services for your applications. You also need to plan on how and when to perform the migration of the applications. This is where Azure Migrate Wave Planning comes into the picture. Wave planning in Azure Migrate helps you plan your large migration in batches called waves, enabling you to identify quick wins, handle dependency risks, and reduce migration uncertainty. Wave planning supports planning of your entire inventory in Azure Migrate project, including servers, databases, and web apps in an application-centric approach. Before wave planning, ensure that you create an Azure Migrate project. Discover the inventory of your workloads. Use dependency analysis to create applications for your business units and group dependent workloads together. Tag workloads appropriately for easier identification and scoping. Perform assessment to identify the migration strategy and Azure targets. Let's now see how to plan waves with a demo to create migration waves. To create migration waves, you must click on Create Wave in the Wave Planning tile on the Migrate Project Overview. Leveraging assessments during the creation flow enable you to use Azure recommendations for targets and tools in the wave, helping you plan faster. You can update and review the applications to be added to the wave. Since this is the first wave, it is recommended to migrate low-complexity applications first to minimize risk. After reviewing the components, you proceed to create the wave. In a similar fashion, you can create multiple waves defining your migration staging plan and view it in the Wave Planning page. Once the wave is created, you next need to identify the plan on how to migrate the wave. As you click on the wave, you see all you need to do to be ready for migration. You can review and update the Azure targets and tools, which are defaulted based on Azure's recommendations captured in the assessments. For this wave, MySQL database is targeted to migrate to Azure Database for MySQL using Database Migration Service, and the Tomcat server is hosted to Azure VM using Server Migration. You can also review the tasks that are required to migrate the workload from on-prem to Azure Target based on the tool selection. Wave planning supports planning tasks for all workloads and targets supported in Azure Migrate. Based on the targets and tools, Azure Migrate Wave Planning also recommends prerequisite tasks. You can also track the start and target dates for executing the wave. Once the prerequisites and configuration is complete, your planning is complete and you are ready to migrate. In this video, you learned how to leverage Azure Migrate Wave Planning to create waves by grouping workloads and applications using information such as tags, criticality, complexity, workload, properties, and others. You saw how you can establish a detailed execution plan by identifying timelines, prerequisites, and migration tasks, all pre-populated through Azure Migrate recommendations. As the next step, you can execute the migration waves on the plan date and centrally track the end-to-end migrations using Azure Migrate. Happy migrations!